Hello, good morning, and a warm welcome to today's online NAHT course. Thank you all so much for taking the time to be with us today. It's good to see we have colleagues from all settings with us, and whether you're a member of NAHT or yet to join, I hope you enjoy today's session. A brief word from me just before we start about housekeeping. We will, of course, be sharing course materials with you as soon as we can. And if you want captions, you can request this in your control panel. Please do post comments in the chat, and please be aware that all participants can see these and the screen name you've chosen today. We will be having a group poll at the end, and please do check our website for details of our CPD courses and conferences and the exciting pathway events and webinars coming up. Now, it's a real privilege to be here this morning with you all, because we are delighted to welcome Tim Bowen, the NAHT National President, to introduce our session this morning. So I'll pass over now to Tim. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here with you. As Fiona said, I have the huge honour of being our union's National President this year. And during my presidential year, my key area of focus has been to do everything I can to raise the profile of the well-being of school leaders and just say how vitally important this is. In December of last year, NAHT published a report. It was entitled Fixing the Leadership Crisis, Time for Change. And the report detailed the results of a survey of 2,047 school leaders. Now, the findings, although not surprising, gave real cause for concern. And I'm just going to share with you briefly a few of the key findings. 75% of school leaders reported that their role had a negative impact on their mental health. School leaders were asked to summarise their experience of being a school leader over the last year in a single word of their choosing. And the top three words were exhausting, challenging, and stressful. And finally, in the same survey, more than half, 53% of respondents who are not currently a head teacher indicated that they do not aspire to headship, with a further 23% saying they were undecided. And concerns about personal well-being were recorded as the single biggest deterrent to school leadership by middle leaders and assistant and deputy head teachers. 87% listed this as their top deterrent. Now, I've been a primary school head teacher for over 25 years. And yes, on the journey, I have had my fair share of challenges and difficulties. But I still passionately believe that at its best, teaching, school leadership, and especially headship, it's an immensely worthwhile and rewarding career. But it's no secret the pressures and the challenges of the job have increased significantly over the past few years, both prior to and, of course, during the pandemic. And therefore, this message about the importance of well-being for school leaders has never been more vital. And a key component of that is for individual school leaders to absolutely prioritise their well-being and recognise the need to do so and have strategies to help them achieve this. And for that reason, I'm so pleased that you've chosen to attend this online webinar today, Editing Your Next Chapter. And I'm delighted to introduce our facilitator, David Gumbrell. David has been a teacher in Surrey for over 20 years. He's been the head teacher of a junior school for 7 years, and he's an author, coach, and speaker on resilience and well-being in schools. David, we're so pleased that you're leading this session for us today, and we look forward to both listening to you and learning from you. Welcome.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you for taking the time to introduce this session. And I would like to just echo the idea of thank you to all of you who've come onto this call, because it just proves that you're going to allow yourself the time to consider your own needs rather than always considering other people's needs. In my role, I work with ECTs, I work with staff in the general populace of the school, and I work with head teachers. And what is true in all of those circumstances is we seemingly have got to the point where our narrative is we haven't got time to look after ourselves. We're too busy looking after each other. And my role, I see in that, is that I'm an editor of that story. I'm trying to consider, or asking colleagues to consider, an alternative narrative to this I'm too busy to look after myself. Because as Tim said in those statistics, too many of us don't put that high enough on our to-do list, and therefore too many head teachers are walking away or are feeling overly overwhelmed by that role. And that's also true for early career teachers too. And we all know that data as well, I'm sure, that only 66% get through to their 6th year of teaching. How do we get to this? Well, I believe there's something in the idea of editing our narrative, editing our next chapter. And that's why I've used that as a heading today, to really get us to consider who's in control of this story, and or how can we gain control of our story? What can we do to help and support ourselves, to allow ourselves to be the author of our own journey? And that to me is a really important and very empowering role that we can offer ourselves if we are able to achieve that. And some of the things I'm going to say this morning may be no more than a reminder. But even if they are a reminder that we act upon as a result of being here this morning, then that is time well spent. We need to rewrite our story. We need to edit the next chapter. We need to understand how we're going to go about doing that. So let's have a go. Firstly, I think that this is an important idea and an important concept. When we're writing, we sometimes don't think of the word, and when I can't think of the right word that I'm doing when I'm writing, I just put a line, which is a space. I'm just going to pass over it, and I'm just going to get the general sense of the sentence, the idea that's coming out of my head, down onto paper. In many ways, it's the same idea of our heads being too busy with too much stuff, and that we need to create a space for us to reconsider that word, to think of a better word, to fill in that gap. But nonetheless, the space is there for a reason. I know when I was head that I very rarely allowed myself that space. I felt that my door should always be open, that my availability should be 100%. And indeed, my emails could ping at whatever o'clock, and my phone could ring at whatever time. And suddenly, the space that I did have was encroached upon. The line that I used to have was no longer there. And that was a line that I drew personally, even before the pandemic, even before COVID hit. So who knows what that line might be? Well, you know where that line might be. But have you drawn that line? And do you give yourself that space? Or do you still feel yourself compelled to be available at all times to all people? And if that's the case, then I would argue that that is unsustainable, and that is partly due to the fact that people are feeling stressed and overwhelmed because we're not looking after ourselves as much as we need to. The cold hard truth, folks, is that we are vulnerable, imperfect human beings. We're not machines. We're not superheroes. We're human beings. And with that come vulnerabilities and imperfections. And therefore, I believe that to give ourselves a space is one of the most vital things that we can do. Something so simple and yet so difficult to achieve in reality. How do we get that space? Importantly, how do you get that space? Because essentially, this is not about me, this is about you. I find the space and I want you to as well. And when we find that space, we can find the answer to some difficult questions. This just made me smile, colleagues, which is why I shared it with you. If we don't edit our story, if we don't stop and think, then we're still unsure as to the course of action that we're going to take. So today, we're going to edit our story. What can we do to allow ourselves to edit that story? What do we need to do? Well, even the greatest manuscripts, even the most popular tomes, don't come out as fully formed, wonderful bestsellers. There's a process that goes through them, and that process is a process of editing. So what I thought would be really good is to actually have a look at some and see whether you can identify some of the edits or the first drafts of some significant books. Okay, so what I'd like you to do at the moment is just have a look at the scripts I'm going to offer to you. There are 6 of them, and on a piece of paper and a pen, just allow yourself the moment to see if you can identify them. Don't put them in the chat yet. There'll be the glory of knowing the right answer at the end, so don't worry about that, but don't just yet share your answer with all. But I thought it might be a nice little bit of fun to get us going on that theme. So the first one is this. So this is, as far as I am aware, a draft of a very significant book. There are clues there, but clearly they've made some big changes. Whether that's a self-edited story or whether that's an edited story, I don't know. The information didn't tell me that. But nonetheless, there are clues there that might help you to identify that book. And for those of you who can't see that, let me just zoom in for you. So here we go. This is a tighter snippet. I think there's clues enough in there to help you to find that answer. The problem is when you're online, it's very difficult to identify when people have finished and ready to go to the next question. So I'm just going to have to try and gauge that, aren't I? I think that moment is probably quite soon. Let's move on to number 2. So there are some clues in this book. I think significant clues in this book, but that may be my bias because I do like this book. I've read this book and therefore potentially I have some hidden extras. Have a good look at that. Maybe I can zoom in for you to give you some bigger clues. What book is that? What book didn't come out as a fully formed, perfect narrative when it first came out, but needed the time and, as I said earlier, the space to make those changes from what it is to what it was? Thank you to the colleague who has identified that they're ready to move on. I will use you as my barometer of speed, or my speedometer. Thank you. So number 3 then, I think, is quite a tricky one. So I've thrown this one in for my adaptive
It's
teaching.
an NAHT. It's like a...
Those who found it too easy, the first two, may not find this one as easy.
Leave the meeting. You can email.
So have a go at this one. I'll zoom in for you. It may help you. Or this image might help you. Or get you closer to the answer. Tricky one. But we have to demonstrate adaptive teaching, colleagues. We have to demonstrate adaptive teaching. Modeling good practice. Number 4. Here we go. Here's number 4. Have a good look at the clues that you're offered there. A very famous book. Non-fiction this time, colleagues, so don't assume that it's fiction. And zooming in just to help those who were struggling and battling with that one. Number 5. This is a tricky one. When I was practicing this, my wife didn't get this one, which made me smile. Let me zoom in, see if that helps. And then the final one, colleagues, the final one. Don't know if I'm going at the right speed, but I'm just going to go with it. Is this one. And if you're gauging yourself against my wife's efforts, then she got this one almost immediately, colleagues, almost immediately. Maybe you did too, I don't know. This one seemed like a typed script, which may be easier. Okay, now is the time for the glory, folks. So if you want the glory, you can be the first on the button and you can type in the answer to number 1. Who thinks they know what number 1 is? Let's have a type in the chat box off. Who's going to be first to the chat box and claim the prize? Ah, well done, well done. S. Pickering has it. Well done. Number 2. Oh, very accurate. We've gone for the actual book. That's impressive, folks. That's impressive. Well done, Lynn. You get an extra point for that. Well done. You were the first one. Okay, so we're going Hobbity. We're going Hobbity. Lord of the Rings, Hobbity. We'll go with that. Something Tolkien-y. Yeah, we'll go with that. Next one. What do we think, folks? This one was a tricky one. And we've got a couple of entries. Oh, 3 entries are the same, 4 are the same, 5 are the same. We are either copying each other now, folks, or we're quite sure that that's Oliver Twist. And indeed it is. Are there any other Olivers in literature? If you say Oliver to anyone, they will genuinely come back with Oliver Twist. So well done to Elizabeth, who I think was doubting herself with some question marks, but nonetheless was well worth a try. Oh, I like the idea that Sarah's diving in before I give the question. That's impressive, Sarah. Excellent work. So origin of the species. Don't worry, I'm only joking. It's nice to see you interacting and engaging. Thank you. So yeah, Origin of the Species, so Darwin's seminal text, but that didn't come out straight away, folks. It wasn't just there. He needed the time and the space to allow himself to get to that point. Number 5, the one that my wife didn't get, but I'm sure collectively we can beat that position. Oh, not quite so sure then, folks. Oh, okay, thank you. We've got a Bond script. Oh, we're going for the actual title of the film. I'm sorry, I don't know the actual title of the film. I'm not a big Bond fan, so I'm going to give points to everybody that's got everyone that's got James Bond, because that's what I went with. But Goldfinger seems popular. Maybe I'll look that up afterwards and find out. And then last but not least, oh, Key West, Florida must be a clue. Very good point. Very good point. And the fabulous, fabulous, fabulous Warhorse. And for those of you who've been to see that play, was in for a treat. And for those of you who have read the book, we're in for a treat, as with many Michael Morpurgo titles, of course. I think I cried too, if I'm allowed to admit that to a group of head teachers and senior leaders. A very emotional experience. But sometimes emotions are good, aren't they? Because it allows it out into the big wide world. So there were the answers that I got, folks. You've done very well. And thank you for joining in on that quiz. But why am I telling you this? Is this just wasting your time? No, I don't believe that it is. Firstly, it's switching you off because it's filling your brain with something else. You're having to think, and that's a good place. But it's also giving you space. It's giving you space to consider yourself, and that's the whole point of today's session. I'm currently doing my master's, and I'm currently on the dissertation section of that master's. And I regularly have to edit my work. I regularly have to think, I have to write a lot. So I've got a 12,000 word essay to write. But within that, I have to write a lot. And sometimes I write something that I think is brilliant. I'm really pleased with it. I've come up with some clever words, and I've assimilated some clever people's clever words, and I put it all together in a paragraph. And I'm really pleased with that paragraph. I then come back to that paragraph, reread my same words, and I'm not quite as pleased and not quite as proud as I previously was. Somehow, somewhere along the line, I can see my words differently to the way they previously were. Somehow, I'm able to see things that I hadn't seen before, and that maybe my cleverness in my structure of my sentences wasn't quite there. But what's the difference? What's the difference? Well, the difference is that I believe that I was too emotionally embroiled in it. I was too emotionally invested in it. And that's why I couldn't see it. And in one book that I've got about how to write a dissertation, it tells you to just leave it for 48 hours. Anything you write, leave it for 48 hours before you have a look at it again, so that you're able to genuinely edit your work. If you don't leave that time, you're not genuinely editing it at all, because you're too emotionally involved, you're too emotionally engaged in that. And that might be a very useful tool for you, colleagues, when you're thinking about writing the documents that you have to write. But there have been occasions where I can't see it myself. And even though I leave my 48 hours, I can't see it. So the editing process has to become one of someone else looking in and seeing it. What's that got to do with our emotions and our well-being and our resilience? Well, I believe that sometimes we can self-edit our stories. When I'm feeling good, I'm able to see the wood from the trees. I can feel the emotions, but I'm managing those emotions. I'm dealing with those emotions. I can handle anxiety. I can handle stress. I can handle the job I'm being asked to do. So there are times when I'm capable of self-editing, but I also know there are times when I'm not capable of self-editing. I need someone else to help me and guide me along the way. And I hope that today is me helping you to guide you into rewriting your story of one of prioritizing your well-being more than you probably are. Because self-editing, for some of you, isn't quite hitting the mark yet. For some of you, you can't see the wood from the trees. You can't see how you're going to give yourself that time to think. You just keep going. And I understand that pressure completely, but I'm very much of the mindset and that you need to look after yourself. You need to give yourself this time, as Tim said at the start. But I know that I can't always edit my own story. At times, others have to help me edit. Who is that person for you? Who is that person that can read you, that can read your script before you kind of even know it yourself? Treasure that person, but listen to that person. Because for me, resilience isn't about something we just do in a staff meeting and then forget. Well-being is not come on a webinar and then do nothing with it. Well-being is about learning to edit the narrative, and edit either being self-editing or getting someone else to help us to see the emotions within our stories. I wonder if you've asked yourself any of these questions. I know that I have. I know that in transitions in my career up to this point, I have regularly considered, what was my story? In the past, what was it? When someone asks you, what is your story currently? What are the inflections that you put into that story? What are the headlines of that story as it currently is now? Is it a mixture of positives and negatives, or is it dominated by negatives because of the pressures that you're under? But I think if you look at your story, once you've articulated your story, I think that will give you good clues, or someone else really good clues as to where you are at the moment emotionally, where you are at the moment in terms of feeling stressed, feeling anxious, a sense of overwhelm. But also importantly for me is that you feel in control of what your story will be in the future. I regularly push myself further forwards and think, if I was looking back in a year's time, what would my story be? What do I want my story to be? And then how am I going to make that story come to life? How am I going to edit my current situation so that my future story will tell the storyline that I want it to tell? And then when we think about our story, is our story a mixture of positives and negatives, or purely just negative? When I ask early career teachers, what's your story? It starts with a negative. It starts with a sense of emotional overwhelm in the moment. It's too much to cope with, and therefore the emotional burden is so great that for the first 5-10 minutes of that conversation, the story is one of negativity and stress and worry. But it doesn't take long before a new storyline evolves, one of balance, one of there are positives, and I can help to guide them and shape them into thinking of those positives. So when you're thinking of your story, try to get some balance in that story. All good stories have positives and negatives, points where it goes down and points where it goes up. But I think it's important for us when we're considering our narrative to think of the positives that are happening as well as the negatives. Feel free, colleagues, to come onto the chat box and share with colleagues something that's gone well recently. Because I think the collective narrative is somewhat skewed. I think the collective narrative of headship is somewhat skewed. And that's why it's wonderful that Tim is pushing against that negative narrative and offering support to edit those stories and make them more positive. So consider now, colleagues, what was your story in the past? What is your story now? And what will be your story in the future? And that's what I mean in terms of future chapters and your influence over those future chapters. Lovely. Thank you to the colleague who said that it's important that you now know the support that you give to families makes that difference. Wonderful. That your community needs the school, and that the community that you lead is making a difference to those families. There's an altruistic need, isn't there, for us to do this? And therefore there's a confirmation that's come from COVID situation, the lockdown situation, that's offered you a positive narrative. That's what matters, isn't it? For many of us, that our family, we make a difference to the families and the children within those families. Thank you. Does anybody else want to share now? We've got a first one. Thank you to that colleague who offered us a first one. What else is going well? Lovely. So we've got another story here of staff, how far the staff would go to offer support. I think there was a collegiality that we learned, wasn't there? The importance of other people, and working together as a team and feeling that collectively we can overcome this adversity. I think that's a really key message, and I'm really pleased that that your staff were able to achieve that, colleagues. And literally how far, so geographically testing as well, was it? Wow, that's lovely. Isn't that nice that someone with so many skills and so much to bring to the school has realized, thanks to you, that she has a talent and can do something else, do something different. That's a wonderful story to be guided by and shaped by. Lovely. I was working with an early career teacher, and I was asking her about significant individuals that have had an impact on their world in the first 5 years of their teaching. And one young lady talked about her TA, teaching her how to be a big grown-up adult when she was too young and feeling overwhelmed by that sense of responsibility. But it's lovely when we recognise our support staff. So the challenges of the sheer quantity of work that gets it down, but there are positive rays. And I think that these positive rays, I love that phrase, the positive rays are what we need to identify. And possibly that's what I mean by editing our narrative. If our narrative is becoming overwhelmingly negative, It's not a realistic perspective. It's an emotionally driven perspective, which is slightly different. It's a very human reaction in many ways, but it's not a helpful narrative to be living by. So what I think I'm saying is, maybe we can edit our narratives to identify these positive rays, as you so succinctly put there. I really like that idea. And yeah, the focus on the young people that we're guiding in their early journey. That's wonderful, isn't it? We need to remind ourselves that although we've got paperwork to do and risk assessments to complete, it's the young people and the communities that we're making a difference to. That is the story that drives us forwards. But none of these things can happen, colleagues. Thank you to those who are willing to share. None of these can happen without ourselves being able to give all of this wonderful skill and guidance to dinner ladies of 16 years. So therefore that goes back to us needing to prioritize ourselves within this story, that you are the main character. And we can't have a story without a main character. But the main character isn't other people. The main character is you. So you need to look after yourself, just as the author looks after the main character. The main character overcomes the adversities within the story, but nonetheless, the main character is looked after by the narrative. And it's your school, and it's your setting, and it's your story. And that you are the author of this story within your context that's unique to you and unique to your community. And that's what makes it so lovely. But I don't believe that anybody else is the editor of our stories other than ourselves. It's taken me quite a long time to realize this. I blamed other people. I blamed everything else. But then I came to the stark realization that the only person that can write my story is me. The events that happened to me may not change, but my reaction to those events can. I can edit my perception to those stories. And in editing my perception of the experiences that I have comes through looking after myself. And I know that on the days that I look after myself, I respond better to the challenges ahead in everyday life, in learning to teach, in working in the context and the environments that I do. I know that when I look after the main character in my story, me, I can create a better narrative for myself. I react to situations better. I see the situation that's in front of me better. The relationships that I build are more effective. The work that I do is of greater standard. And I don't get that sense and that feeling of overwhelm when I don't look after myself. So what is this gap? Viktor Frankl stated this, that between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our ability to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. He's also talking about that headspace that I was talking about. But he was talking about the perceptions coming in and our reading of those events. But how do we give ourselves that space? If we're available 24/7, if we allow notifications on our phone to beep our weekends through as a punctuation narrative, we need the space for our growth and freedom. Because in reverse, if our response is our growth and freedom, then there is a space to choose our response. Thus, we need to create a space between stimulus and response, so that it becomes less emotive and more rational, less animal and more human. How do we create that space, that 48 hours between reading our work, the gap between something, an input coming in and our response to that input? Well, to me, it's very clear. We look after ourselves. Because when we look after ourselves, that gap between stimulus and response is widened. We have longer to respond. We're more likely to respond in the way that we want to respond, so that in the future, we consider that our response was a good one, that we're pleased with, that we didn't make the situation worse than it already was, because we responded to it so well in the first place. So let's consider this then, colleagues. If we want our story to be about growth and freedom, which ultimately I hope that that's true for all, then we need to choose our story. So we need to create a space to edit our story, which goes back to giving ourselves headspace, to allow ourselves to edit what our story is, so that it can become a positive narrative. We can find the positive rays that our colleague was saying earlier, so that we can spot the talent of a dinner lady that another colleague was doing. We can't do that if we haven't got our head above the water. And we generally don't have that if we're not looking after ourselves. So how do we get that space? Or more importantly, because you don't need to worry about what I need to do to get that space. Maybe that question is misplaced. Maybe it shouldn't say we, maybe it should say you. How do you allow yourself that space? How do you prioritize that space? How do you justify that space to yourself and to colleagues, to ensure that you believe that you can get that space to help you, to be that leader that you want to be? That's what this is about. You can't just keep going. That storyline doesn't work for a human being. That storyline is superheroes' storyline, and we're not superheroes. We're just bog standard, good old human beings. Who remembers the name of this character? He was in a story once, a story that was a while back. Come onto the chat box, folks, if anybody can remember. Thank you, thank you. We've got a few people that are now proving themselves to be old enough to remember this storyline. I'm sure many of you also know this storyline. It was a very clever storyline. We had a cute character that was then put into danger. There were some rules, folks. We mustn't do to a gremlin. And like all books, like Harry Potter, don't go to magic school, Harry, on the first page. So what does Harry do for the next 450 pages? He goes to magic school. So we know he's in danger from the start. This film did something similar. Does anybody know what rule 1 was? Lucy and Kelly might, because they know. Oh, look, Sarah's gone for 2. Wow, Sarah's jumped ahead. She's good. She's good. No, don't apologize. No need to apologize. Enthusiasm shouldn't be apologetic. Definitely not. And Lucy dived in with the last one. Thank you. So keep away from bright light. So for those of you who don't know the film, what happened? Any guesses? Oh yeah, he was put on a bright light. I think he was photocopied at one point, which was it. And then don't get it wet. So Sarah could remember not to get it wet. Any guesses for those of you who haven't seen the film as to what happens in that plot? Oh yeah, he gets wet. And then that final rule was, as Sarah quite rightly put it, never, never, ever feed it after midnight. Any guesses what might have happened? Oh yeah, it happened. They did get fed after midnight, and then the chaos ensues as normal storylines go. Again, You may be questioning, what's this story, David? What's this narrative? Where's this narrative taking us? Well, it's very clear. There are rules as to what makes a gizmo go. There are rules for a gremlin. There are structural things in a gremlin that makes a gremlin. But there are also structural things deeply embedded in our DNA that make us who we are too. And if we deny ourselves these basic core needs, we can't be that fulfilled human being. We can't be that role model that we want to be, because we won't have the energy, the clarity, or the perception to allow ourselves to play that role. So why do we deny ourselves the things that we need? Do we believe that we're in a superhero film and not the reality of being a human being? Well, let's have a look at some of the rules. And these rules are taken from some serious literature. These are rules that all human beings need. They drive us. They are the gremlin rules. If we can put these into our lives are more fulfilled as a result. If we can put these into our working lives, I believe that we'll be better head teachers, better leaders, more perceptive, you will enjoy it, and those feelings of overwhelm will be lessened. The first one is connection. We are hardwired to be connected to other people. That's why the pandemic for many was so challenging, because we lost that human connection. And in many ways, the remote connection like today is much harder. It doesn't feel as natural, although as adaptable species, we have got used to being online, but I don't think many of us would choose to be online rather than a room together and sharing ideas. And that comes because we need connection. Connection with colleagues, but connection with non-colleagues as well. We can't always talk about teaching. We can't always be thinking of teaching. We shouldn't always be thinking about school. We need to put something into our lives that's non-school. We need to be connected with people that can talk about school when we need it, and we need to be talking to people who are not talking about school at other times. And then importantly, who are those folk for you? And then secondly, if we know we need it, when do we put it in? To our working week. When do we connect with people who are non-teachers as well as teachers? So our first gremlin rule is our ability, or our need, our basic need to connect with each other. The second one is one that you probably know, but still don't act upon. It's that idea of, we'll think about going to the gym and hopefully that'll be enough to get myself fit. You know, that kind of one. But I believe, and I may not be right, it may just be my experience of headship, and I'm happy to accept that that may be the case. But I believe that headship was a mental challenge, not a physical challenge, although at times there was some physicality in terms of trying to restrain a child or stop a situation from evolving. But nonetheless, it's about activity. It's about mitigating that mental challenge and putting in some physical challenge to balance that out. And that doesn't have to be go to the gym. It just means increasing your exercise, increasing your movement, because you'll be surprised at how long you sit at a computer screen or how long you sit talking to people. and how little time you're moving. And yet, unfortunately, folks, our gremlin rule requires us to move. We are not sedentary creatures, although at times sedentary is very lovely, but not all of the time. You know those first two, but there's a difference between knowing and doing something about them. And that, I think, is the key to editing your story. The third one in this list is to take notice of the world around us. Now, I love this one because I'm a very curious human being. I'm very curious about the world around us, and I can see lots of wonderful things out in the wide world that I walk around in. I'm a photographer at heart, and I regularly just take, I'm looking for an image, I'm looking for a picture. It might be a close-up of a flower, it might be a panorama with a sunset, but nonetheless, that captured moment of reality can be really powerful in terms of taking headship out of my head and putting something else in. If I'm thinking of a picture or a photograph, I haven't got room in my head to think about school as well. So I can take it out and put something else in its place. Just like when we listen to a good story, similar things happen. But taking notice of the world around us, taking notice of light to dark, taking notice of cold to warm, taking notice of our breathing, taking notice of our bodies, to know that the barometer of our bodies are telling us the right things. The fourth one that the NHS offer us, because this work has been commissioned by the NHS, the wonderful people who look after ourselves, is keep learning, folks. That seems like a strange one. Hopefully you've learned something today. Hopefully the children will learn something today. But just like we have legs that need physical exercise, we've got a brain that needs mental exercise. I was really reluctant at the beginning of my MRes because I thought I don't have time to put something else into my head. But actually the intellectual challenge of writing at that level has been fantastic, really helpful. It's helped and supported my well-being. It stops me thinking about work and it puts something else in its place because I have to understand the complicated words that I'm trying to read and understand. Are you learning something at the moment? Is an interest that you have outside of education something that you still put into your schedules? Or are there these things that wait till half terms and holidays and high days before we do them? But if we're waiting that long, so we may have lost our reader in the story that we're telling. And then the fifth of five, folks, is this one. We need to give. Now, you all know that you give to everybody, bar one. You're really, really good at being available at all times to all people in your school for the whole time that you're there. And then mobiles and online and COVID and lockdown and home learning has opened up our home environments to more give. We are the smorgasbord of giving to everybody but one. Us as the individual that has to keep giving without giving to ourselves. And yet without giving to ourselves, we've got nothing to give. Now you probably know that and you're probably, David, is that all you're going to say? Yes, because this is a reminder of things that you're not doing. And this is a reminder of things that make us us. make us human beings. And I'm trying to convince you that these things aren't something to think about. These are some things to do, actions to take, things to be put on the job list for you, for your staff, and for your pupils. Not just for you, but I'm starting with you, and then the positive ripple effect can go from that. There's a gap between our chimp brain and our human brain. And if you don't know the work of Steve Peters, I urge you to look into it. But if our chimp takes control, it's chaos. And that information first goes to that chimp. And if we haven't looked after ourselves, if we haven't edited our story and made it a more likely scenario to be a positive ending to that story, then the chimp's going to go for it. But if we can give ourselves that space, we've got a better chance of creating a much more positive human reaction to that situation. It can still be loaded with emotions, but we're in control of those emotions, and that's really important. I haven't got long enough to dive into Steve Peters' work, but A Path Through the Jungle is his most recent title, and I highly recommend it to you. So as we come to the end of this webinar, ask yourself these questions. What will your story be now? And how will you find time to edit that story? I hope that I've told you a story that enables you to really think about yourself, to really feel that you are in control of this. And you skilled practitioners out there in the big wide world is an important one for you to consider. So consider it now, colleagues. It's been lovely to spend some time with you all this morning. I wished that it was live, but these are still tricky times to find a positive narrative, but a narrative you can find. You can edit your own story. You can edit your past, your present, and your future stories. And I hope that something that I've said today can help and support you in that role of being a self-editor rather than me being your editor along the way. Thank you.
David, thank you so much for leading the session this morning, for reminding us of the importance of looking after ourselves and giving ourselves space, helping us with strategies to achieve this and to develop resilience. And what I've been personally challenged on is the point you made about helping us to be in control of our own story in the future. Lots to think about there, but I found it inspiring, and no doubt, I very much hope the delegates attending did as well. You'll see there is a poll survey. If you're attending, we'd ask you to fill in. But before you go, can I please flag up NAHT's Wellbeing Conference on Wednesday, the 23rd of March. This is not only going to be NAHT's first in-person event of the year, it's also the first time our union has held a national wellbeing conference. Just shows the importance that our union attaches to the message of personal well-being for school leaders. If you attend, it'll give you the chance to pause, to reflect, to learn from others, hear some great speakers and recharge, and hopefully go back to school energized and inspired to sustain the vital leadership work you do. Look, if you've enjoyed David's superb presentation this morning, I would encourage you to give yourselves this special day, invite some colleagues to attend as well. This is not about being selfish, this is about prioritizing your well-being. It really is going to be a special occasion, and I very much hope I will see at least some of you there in person. David, thank you so much again, and thank you all for attending. I wish you a good half-term holiday, whether it's next week or the week after. I hope you have some real quality time to rest and reflect, and then a good rest of the academic year. Thank you very much.
Thank you.